Hello, hello, hello. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa Nichol, and I am so excited to talk about accessibility today with you. And I have a lineup of amazing guests this morning. And our very first one is the amazing Sara Faatz. Hello, Sara.
Hello, hello. Thank you for having me on the show today.
I am so glad that you are here and that you are passionate about this subject, as well as are many people on our team. I'm very
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I know, Kathryn, though we usually talk about accessibility from a code side because a lot of us are developers on our team and we're very passionate about the programmings. But there's a lot of us who are also really care about the design side of life. And so I know Kathryn had a vision for us this year to talk about accessibility from the get-go, from the
Yeah.
design side of the
Yeah.
story. So I'm very
Absolutely.
yeah, I'm like, oh, let us dive in. But yes, before we do, I am Alyssa Nichol, as I said, a senior developer advocate at Progress and Angular GDE. Sara, would you do a quick intro for
Yes,
yourself?
I am Sara Faatz, and I am the Director of Technology Community Relations here at Progress. We get to work with wonderful people like Alyssa and Kathryn and Sam and Ed, some other familiar faces you see on Code It Live quite a bit, and super excited to join this live stream. Accessibility is a topic that is just near and dear to my heart, and
Mm.
I just don't know that we could talk about it enough. I have to be honest with you.
Yeah. I know that Kathryn, when Kathryn and I were brainstorming, I came to you about the stream and you were like, yes, I love all these ideas, but I have a story to share. And so I was wondering if we could maybe open up the show with that story. I think I'm labeling this segment of our show, implementation is not always enough. So, yes, can
Yeah.
you tell me that story again, but live?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it definitely is a heart's in the right place, but implementation is not always, you need to really know what you're doing. The story that I was sharing with Alyssa is that my daughter, who actually just graduated high school yesterday, um, her school uses an application where parents, and I think a lot of school districts have these. I could go in and I could look at her grades, I could see her attendance record, I could see, what her class schedule was.
Hmm.
And it's a great tool. It's super useful. And they have an accessibility button um, within the application that you can click on if you needed if you wanted to start some of the accessibility features or utilize
Mm.
some of those. Problem is, it covers. You could only move it in 4 different places within the app, and
Mm.
every place that you move this little icon, it covered up something that was germane or super important to that application. And,
Ugh.
as I looked at that, I thought, again, their heart was in the right place, right? They're trying to do
Mm.
the right thing. Um, but it actually made the application inaccessible for everyone, right? And I think that's one of the things that we have to be really mindful of when we're
Mm.
implementing accessibility features and thinking about accessibility as a whole. It should help and not hurt the application and the experience.
No, absolutely. And I think that was a really good example to kick us off because I'm going to press play on this. We're doing show flow notes in we're going to do it in Dropbox paper today. So if everyone's like, "What is this weirdness you are sharing with us?" It's okay. It's going to be fine. We'll survive Dropbox paper together. I think it's an exciting way to to navigate. But I have a quote actually. I'm going to make it larger, bigger, as Layla says. So there's a book by Laura Kalbag, and she's actually one of our friends in the community. She's very passionate about accessibility. And so I don't know if everyone, I'm actually going to remove my notes so I can show it. I have, funnily enough, the physical version and also an audiobook version of Accessibility for Everyone. And Laura goes through and there's a couple of notes I wanted to highlight just to kind of kick us off as far as definitions. What are we talking about? I feel like it's the way that she opened up her book, and I feel like it's brilliant because it's like very often buzzwords that we take in our community and clean plate of accessibility. So she says that accessibility in the physical world is the degree to which the environment is usable by as many people as possible. Web accessibility is the degree to which a website is as usable to as many people as possible. We can think about both kinds of accessibility as forms of inclusion. I love this quote, and it reminds me of your story
Yeah,
because they were aiming for this retroactively, right? They
yep,
were aiming for
yep,
this.
yeah,
And not only did they not hit more accessible, but they actually made it less usable for
right,
everyone.
right,
Yeah.
yeah,
So
yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, what I love about this quote, I was thinking about this the other day, um, actually, and I was thinking about retrofitting, just thinking about a lot of things when it came to accessibility, and if you think about it in, particularly in North America, if we have a building, a physical space that isn't accessible, people are up in arms, right? They're
mm,
angry about it. They petition. They try to make things happen so that a
mm,
building, a facility, can be used by anybody, not just an able-bodied person. And I think that we need to get to that point where we have that same outrage when it
mm,
comes to the digital experience, whether it's your phone, website, any of those things, where we say this, it's not okay, it's not acceptable.
mm,
But then I was thinking, I've been on the road quite a bit for work, and one of the things that I think we don't talk about enough is how challenging that can be, kind of like in a physical building. When you go to certain places in Europe, um, it's harder to retrofit that accessibility, the ramps, or
yeah.
stairwells and things like that.
No,
and,
yeah.
and you know and I think that we have to also have that same mindset when we go and look at applications. What
Yeah.
can we do, right? It's barring a full rewrite, right? How can you retrofit? And
Yeah.
that can be easy in some cases, or it can be really challenging in others. So I know you guys are going to be talking about a lot of things today, but that's I think comparing buildings and physical spaces to what we're doing from a technology perspective is so relevant. Um,
Mm. Yeah, no, and we actually have a guest coming on to do a segment exactly about
yeah,
retrofitting.
yep,
His name's Dan Denney. He is a designer that I actually used to work with. I met him at code school, and like back in the day whenever I was first getting started. And so I'm really um, glad to have him on. He has a lot of experience doing this retrofitting
yeah,
because maybe it's not that surprising, but many applications, whether it's because it had to get out the door quickly or whether it's because it was created back when just accessibility wasn't a thought, right?
yeah,
It was early days. Many applications that he's worked on throughout the years has to be a retrofit. And so,
yeah, yeah.
but speaking of retrofitting, I know we have actually a white paper slash research study that we
We
also
do.
wanted to talk about,
Yeah,
which I was like, I think this wasn't it released? At least the white paper portion was released around the same time that we started talking about like let's do the stream, let's get our guests lined up, and I was like, oh, this is like fresh off the press,
yeah.
like
This just came out, actually within the last month or so. So super excited. Progress commissioned a worldwide study. We used a firm called Insight Avenue,
mm,
called the Human Centered Software Design: A State of the Marketplace, as Alyssa's sharing right now. Um, the team conducted over 700 interviews,
mm,
with developers and IT folks, um, from organizations that have more than 250 employees. There are
mhm.
13 different countries that we looked at, and
Yeah, I
the
saw.
study,
I was like,
yeah,
so I'm assuming the 250 employees was because just wanted it to be larger companies with more
yeah,
applications, like
exactly.
more
Looking at larger applications,
right,
exactly. Yep,
makes
yeah,
sense. And we have the links actually. Can we plop the link to because we have a homepage as well that kind of goes over you can download the white paper, look at the research study, its statistics, what they found, and more details about it. And so let's plop that in the
yeah,
chat.
absolutely.
But also, I wanted to highlight at first I was like, "Oh, so Progress did a research study," but it was actually a a firm that specializes in
Yep.
this
Yeah,
that
yeah,
did the study, as you
yeah,
mentioned.
we worked with them we helped scope out the questions and helped shape the survey, to help understand, what we really wanted to, excuse me, we wanted to highlight what we were looking for this, and we talk a lot about, this is a topic, again, and I said is near and dear to my heart, and part of that has to do with the fact that, you know, during the pandemic, applications and websites that used to just be there for convenience became apps of necessity, and we haven't looked back
Mhm.
since, right? Our reliance as a society on the digital experience, it just increases day after day, right? And so the idea that we potentially have some um, that we have applications that people can't access, and that might be
Mhm.
in some cases the only way they can interact with a product, with a service, with a brand, with other humans, you know, that's not okay, right? So we need to make sure that that's, that we're really thinking about the human side of software as we're
Yeah.
building.
Yeah, Sarah in Laura's book, she mentions her brother, who has like a disability, and he has issues. It's just using websites and using the internet in general, but it's the majority of his day, and just how taxing it is to even just use a mouse or to navigate a site. And as you know, this segment is called "Implementation is not always enough." Um, she talks about how oftentimes they might litter in like alt text everywhere or litter in things that are only to be read by a screen reader. But she said that her brother actually just copy and paste content, which I actually do this too, into the exact same screen reader. I was like, oh my gosh, we use
Yeah.
the same screen reader. Just because I don't parse visual content very well, I never have. And so, in order to get away from because the screen reader will go off and start reading these navigational things or these headers, these hidden things,
Right,
or even sometimes to the detriment of the user, these extra bits that someone thought would be useful, but is actually blocking the way to the content on the
right,
site.
right,
And so, like, for instance, explaining how to navigate the site with a keyboard when a screen reader hits, right? And like,
right,
and so then
right,
having to go through that, and you're like, I just wanted to read that, right? The content.
right. Yeah, yeah.
Um, and so, oh, Thindle, hi, Thindle. Sorry, I was not checking out the contents. Good to see you. I know we've
Happy.
been busy. It is good to
Yeah.
see you in chat though. Thindle said, I think Microsoft released an Xbox controller that was basically a plug board and a whole bunch of accessories, but still an open format to use your own if you have them. Oh, that's cool. I know I've been learning actually more about accessibility devices um, that people use like all the time that I'm unaware that even existed. So it's really they're oh yeah they Kathryn said they're probably leading the way in assistive gaming tech. Yeah, I think that was one of the things too, that was brought up was just we think about devices, right? And like designing for like particular devices and what people are doing with them. But I think oftentimes we miss the mark because we assume that we are the target audience or that we
Right,
understand the
right,
target audience. And so then we're like, of course, this is how, you scroll on your phone with your
right,
thumb or with your
right,
finger or with your, both paws. I don't know how you're doing
right.
it, right? And so there's very simple things that assumptions that we make. And I think you hit on it earlier of us talking about it, I think is the first step
Yeah,
because that opens these doors to understanding how are you using that,
yeah,
right? So
yeah. And the other thing that's interesting, I think, what people don't think about is if you make your application accessible you know, for everyone, it really is it's a better experience for everybody across the board. And I know that sounded very better way of saying that, but essentially what I'm saying is if you think about accessibility, if you think about inclusive design, even if you're designing or creating for a small group of people, or you assume it's a small group of people, and it's
mhm.
probably bigger than you actually realize, but um, then you're actually making that experience better across the board, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
that's and so it's definitely a better way to think about your user experience in
Yeah.
general.
No, absolutely.
Those are Captain Obvious statements for today, Alyssa, just an
What'd
FYI.
you say about
My Captain Obvious statements for today, just throwing that out there.
but like, do you own a captain hat? Like, we just need to
I
know.
really
Like,
should, I think.
okay, okay, we're gonna have to fix that. It's fine. No, I'm in a like an example that I read was adding a button to your site to allow users to view the text larger versus just making all the text larger
Right,
on the site, right? And so
right, right.
because
Yeah,
oftentimes as I was saying, you'll assume like it's this small portion of people, so they'll use this button.
right,
But then creating larger font sizes might not just help people like with seeing disabilities, but maybe with reading disabilities or like
Right,
attention disabilities. Like,
right.
so
Yeah.
I think it's the have you heard of universal design before?
No, I haven't. No.
Before I read Laura's book, I'd heard of it before, but I didn't have like a clear definition of it. And she says she defines the difference between like accessibility design and universal design as accessibility design has concessions or like
Right. Right.
adaptions, right, made
Yeah.
as an afterthought,
Interesting.
sometimes
Yeah.
mixed in the beginning, whereas universal design considers the need of a diverse human population from the get-go.
I
And
love
she gives
that.
this
Yeah.
example because you were talking about accessing a building, right?
Right. Yeah.
She gives this example of like a ramp that's like attached to the
Yep.
side of the building, like away from the main entrance at later on. And so
Right.
if you need the ramp, you have to go out of your way in order to access the building, but
Right.
you still have
Right. Yeah.
access to the building. So the building is accessible,
Right.
but it's not universally designed
Right.
versus an entrance that has a side by side ramp and stairway that was built in concrete from the beginning of time
Right.
for that building. Right. And so
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
that's
And I
the forethinking, right?
right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And I think, as you also mentioned in the very beginning, even from a building perspective, but also from a software perspective, you know, this isn't something. This is a newer. I mean, uh, it's not something people thought about originally. And so a lot of times we are retrofitting, right? We are going back, and so
Mhm.
it is still great that we have that. I agree with you. But um, if we could start from scratch and make all the buildings have those side by side ramps and stairwells, that would be amazing.
Yeah.
Um, but obviously, that's not the reality that we live in right now. So I think I think it's getting people to think about it, and have an accessibility first mindset. And
Yeah.
I love the idea of a um,
Yeah, the
universal.
universal design. I there was actually a term in I'm gonna reshare my screen,
Yeah.
in the study for the white paper, because I was asking these questions of, like, who ran the study, who answered the study's call, like, what was the audience, those kind of things. But one, question I was like, what was the premise of the study? Just the overall arcing, like, why are we doing this? And in the website and on the white paper that I think we shared in the chat, and if not, I will plop the link. But the white paper talks about human-centered design, and I'm wondering if that's the same as universal
Yeah.
design.
Oh,
So they
absolutely.
go to
I think
describe it
so.
as like
Yeah.
this long list of items here of building applications and websites that are easy and comfortable to navigate across a diverse community of users, including different mental and physical abilities, demographic personality factors, emotional reactions to technology, as well as diverse language and cultural backgrounds.
Yep.
And they like go on to specify, but it sounds very much like it's one of the hard parts of
Yep.
our
Yeah.
industry is the terms. But I think that was what this study was after, as far as when it would ask the developers or ask the tech leads on the team. It was specifically referring to human-centered design. Uh,
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
but I wanted to go over some of the results. I know you had some that you wanted to highlight as well. I need to zoom out a little bit. That's a little bit too chunky monkey. Let's see. Can I do this? I can do that. Okay, let's do it a bunch of times. Maybe. Hang on. I think I'm in like some weird full screen mode. Yeah, that's what I thought. Like, why is this happening to us? Okay. So on this research study, I did pull out some particular quotes. They go over the methodology and sorry if my internet is slow. They had some what is human-centered software. They defined that, which was the definition I read earlier, but they had some findings that they highlighted. And so 78% trustworthy, 77 easy and intuitive to use, 68 enjoyable. I think these are answering, and that's what I wanted to find of they're answering for their applications that they have built or worked on at these companies, the 200 and
Yeah. So what they're saying is, what does the question was really around, what what makes a what makes an application a human centric application?
I
What
gotcha.
are the qualities of that?
So
And
it's
so
still around defining
it's still
human-centered.
around, yeah, and it's around how our audience thinks about it, right?
Mhm.
How is the development community thinking about, um, what human-centric software is. So it should be trustworthy. It should be, and I think easy and intuitive and inclusive and accessible to all, to me, are they should go hand in hand, or they do. Even rich in functionality. Um, rich in functionality doesn't mean that you have to have millions of different features. It just has to have the right ones, right? And
In my head, that means it works.
yes,
Like, it
exactly.
does the
Yeah,
job
yeah,
I need it to do.
exactly, exactly. And I thought it was interesting that people felt that an application needed to be enjoyable in order for it to be human centric. And I think again that speaks volumes to the idea that we are more reliant on technology today than ever before. And so it's not just, you know it's not enough just to have something there, right? It needs to be, people have higher expectations. Our end users are becoming more sophisticated in how they're using the technology, and they do want to be, they want it to be a delightful experience. They want to
Yeah.
enjoy using the application.
Yeah.
So
Which
yeah.
should not be a surprise, but I think it's becoming more of a demand, I think we'll see
Oh,
of
100%. I agree with you. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're, um, yeah, and again, I think it's our reliance just keeps getting stronger and stronger. I think, even with the democratization of artificial intelligence
Mm.
and generative AI, you know, there is a lot of AI augmented user experiences, right? So or human interactions that are augmented by AI, and I think that's going to make these answers even more relevant,
Wow,
and
absolutely.
because we need to be able to, um, we're not going to, we shouldn't want to replace the human experience all up, right? And so, how do we make sure that the technology that we're delivering um, isn't hurting that experience? Because there will be some things that are, we replace. Maybe we're automating some basic tasks that maybe a human used to do before, so they can be
Mm.
focusing on larger issues. But that just means that it has to be, if that's a frustrating experience, and I think probably everybody who's watching this is going to be able to say that they've had an experience with a chatbot or something else that's leveraging
Oh, no.
that has that has been a frustrating experience. That's not, it has not been designed with the humans, at the core.
No, absolutely. I'm very excited, though, that it's becoming more of an expectation
Yeah,
of,
I agree. Yeah,
employers and applications
yeah,
and teams out there to put this in the forefront of your planning. But I
absolutely.
do know, as we mentioned earlier, that, and actually the white paper talks about retrofitting. I'll scroll to that page real quick
Yeah,
because our time with you is almost up. Ah! But retrofitting the application isn't the answer, was the conclusion of the study. And again, I highly encourage you to download it. It's not a terribly long white paper. I know often when I hear white paper, I'm thinking like hundreds of paper pages, and I'm like, oh my lordy, it's very condensed and very meaty. And so definitely check it out. But we will talk about what to do though when you have to retrofit, because I know that
yeah.
it's the situation that a lot of us live in currently.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think a lot of it, and I know, you'll go in more detail, but I think educating yourself is
mm,
probably the best first step, right? Because I think sometimes, again, it might not be perfect, but being able to take an older application, a legacy application, and add some accessibility, functionality, and features, it's still a necessity, even if it's a challenge. So,
absolutely.
I think finding ways to do that's going to be amazing. I'm so excited for all that you have in store for the day today. Thank you for having me on, and
Oh, thank you so
really
much,
looking
Sarah.
forward to
We
listening to all
appreciate
the really smart people that you have joining us today.
we appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. And I will talk to you later. I'm ready to bring on
Okay,
our next guest, but have a great
sounds
day,
great.
darling.
Thank you. You
Bye.
too. Bye.
Our next guest, I believe, is ready. Oh my goodness, her background is gorgeous. Welcome to the stage, Diana. Hello, darling.
Hi, hi. Thank you for having me here.
Welcome. I'm so glad you are here today. I believe we're talking about building accessibility into your design systems with you. But before we get started, I was hoping you could do an introduction for yourself to the viewers.
Sure. My name is Diana, and I'm a UX UI designer at Resolute Software.
Do you see, because Sarah and I were talking and I've been reading and seeing the buzz online, do you see accessibility becoming more and more of not just a buzz in the community, but like a standard that people expect to be met?
Well, I hope so.
Mhm.
Yeah, to be honest, I've always tried to do my best
Mm,
to design everything with the thought of accessibility.
yeah.
So actually, the topic today that I'm going to talk about is really uh, close to me. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Excellent. Awesome. All right. I'm going to see. Do you have slides to share? I can get those up for you if you'd like.
Yeah, I'm a designer, I'm a visual person, so it's hard for me to talk without.
You're the exact opposite of me. I really will copy and paste like websites into a screen reader, like or export the website as a PDF and just import it into a screen reader, and then I'll just sit there like this, like listening to a website. So it's I love how brains are different. Awesome. I see it. Beautiful slides. And before we get started, will you be defining design system in your talk? Because I wanted to make that a definition up front if not.
Yeah, the design system, I can define it as the single source of truth for
Mm,
all the teams that are involved in uh, develop software product development. So designers, developers, product managers, everybody.
yeah. No, I love that. Excellent. So let's talk about building it into your design systems.
I'm going to start with this question. When is the right time to start thinking about it?
Mm.
And I have a good news and a bad news.
Can we have the bad news first? I'm a bad news first girl. No, I'm kidding. I'm
No.
kidding. You deliver. You deliver.
It won't make sense if we start with the bad. Yeah. So the good news is that it's never too late. Actually, you
Mm,
can always make an assessment, and there's somebody talking about this later. Actually, so it's really interesting topic too. But the issue here is that later on, it's really difficult to sell this idea to the stakeholders and to tell them, guys, it's really important uh, to change our product, to upgrade it, to make it more accessible. Because, of course, for them, it means that they need to invest resources
yeah.
into
Oh
that.
no.
And I'm not sure if people get the importance of that.
Mm,
So yeah, actually, another good news here is that we as designers actually can mitigate these future issues by building our design systems with accessibility in mind.
mm,
Um, so yeah, with my presentation in the following slides, I would like to give you a few hints and examples for some good practices from my experience with building design systems. And with the good practices, there are always better practices. So yeah, I'll try to I'll try to be as helpful as possible.
Yeah, Fuel was saying that I'm sad to share our web app zero investment in accessibility so far. The thought is we can always add it later. And so there's definitely people who are chiming in, agreeing with you that they have the same experience.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed for everybody that for
uh,
every
I
designer and developer that would like to improve an existing product.
mm,
Well, so here we see some building blocks of a design system. We have colors, we have typography, copywriting, spacing, UI components, and layouts, which I believe is nothing new for anybody. But why I have all of this presented here is
mm,
actually because I I like to think about accessibility in every single step of the way. So, for example, when we pick colors, Colors at the same time are very easy and very hard to. Yeah, what I have shown here is that we need to have appropriate contrast ratio between the
Mm,
foreground and background. Maybe you've heard about that, but it can be calculated, which is really really nice. But the hard part is that it's really hard to actually achieve this good ratio and yet have a beautiful UI, because for me this is really important as well. You know, after all, our job as UX designers is to advocate and to ensure that we have better experience for everyone. So
mm.
having sufficient contrast here is a really huge step
Do
in
you
this.
have any? I know I'll ask later about this on the panel, but I was wondering specifically for colors, do you have any tools that help you to ensure, yes, these colors in this prototype are hitting this ratio, or even further than like beyond the prototyping, like where you actually have it maybe live or in Figma, or Ed said CSS needs a contrast color function.
Yeah, actually, I'm using one tool installed directly on my MacBook, which is with color picker for foreground and background.
Okay.
But there are many, many tools. There are Figma plugins and websites, and yeah,
Mm.
it's just they calculate it the same, so it actually doesn't really matter which one you use.
Yeah.
Here I have an example with a bad contrast and good contrast.
Mm.
And maybe a rhetorical question would be, why do we need a contrast? Well, because it's really important that your user knows what you want them to do.
Mm.
Um,
It just reminds me of I MC at NGConf, an Angular conference in Salt Lake, and I was helping like get everyone ready and doing tech checks, and they were testing slides, and they at one point were like, "Should we be having you as our audience tester?" Because I was like, "I still can't read that. Like I'm very I'm very blind." And they were like whether it was the colors of like the code or the background, or whether it was the size of the font, I was like, "No, it's still not like." And they were like, "Oh goodness, you really are blind." I was like, "Yes, maybe I should not be the person that you're averaging here." But no, that it really is important as far as like your call to action, right? Like if you would like the user to complete what you're asking them to do on the page. Yeah, no, absolutely.
Actually, even if you have a really good vision,
Mhm.
if you're, for example, outside and
Oh,
there
yeah.
is sun shining,
Mhm.
you can find it really difficult to read.
No,
So,
absolutely, yeah.
so actually ensuring sufficient contrast and overall good accessibility to your product, as I mentioned earlier, it improves the experience for absolutely everybody.
Mm.
So yeah, these are some like a
Ooh.
small checklist for with the tips for accessible buttons. So
Mm,
we covered the first one with the contrast. It's also really important to have a clear call to action. And what I mean here, uh, I wrote here okay on purpose. I mean, what is okay? It's not a CTA. The user needs to know what what is going
yeah.
to happen, what he's going to do if he or she clicks the button. So yeah, clear call to action. Consistent colors.
Mm.
It's not a good idea to use multiple colors for buttons or for links
And so are
because
you talking about like a rainbow gradient on your button? Or are you talking about every page has a different button color?
both.
Hey now, some people swear by rainbow gradients on their buttons, but
The issue with rainbow gradient is that yellow is not really readable over
Mm,
white.
yeah.
So if you decide to have like green buttons everywhere, then the
Mhm.
buttons should be green everywhere.
Mm.
Yeah,
I
and
know that that helps as far as brand consistency, like the having the same look and feel every single page, every single pop up, whatever
mhm.
medium you're using, it has the consistency. But I suppose it would also help with accessibility, because if you have, for instance, your company green and you know that that company green looks and has a good contrast with this other color, then
Mhm.
like make ensuring that they're always paired up and that no one just throws in a random white or something. I think I suppose that could help the accessibility side in your design systems
Yeah.
as well as the branding side.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, other design elements are really helpful too, because to be honest, we should never rely on color to convey meaning. Some people cannot perceive color at all, so or others have limited color, can see limited colors. So yeah, if we add one visual element that is non-color,
Mm.
it can really help. For
Do you,
example, it's pretty obvious that
by that, do you mean like text icon? Like what's a
yeah, like this example here, it's at least for me, it's pretty obvious that this here is the link because it's in different color and also has underlining. So
I see.
that's like a hint that you
I
can
gotcha.
click it. Mm. And typography. Actually, yeah, here I have a bit statistics. 1 of 10 people have dyslexia. I was pretty sure I had dyslexia in high school. And
It's
the
funny. I actually like later in life discovered that I do, because I don't know. There wasn't dyslexia awareness in my schools.
mm,
I don't know. I just wasn't ever really great at the readings, or like if ever we ever had to read in front of the class, I'd like start sweating bullets. But we never put two and two together that like so yeah, it's actually a really high statistic. I was reading that the other day as well, that it's more than we think. Um,
yeah, I'm not 100% sure I have it, but I think I do. But actually, it's a good thing to have in mind because it can also improve the UI by picking the right fonts. Here are some good good examples of fonts that can be used. Like for
Fuel was
example,
saying that Comic Sans is the best, and I actually
really,
learned.
please.
I know I learned this in design school because I was like, "Why though? Why is it everywhere?" And they were like, "Well, back in the day, they needed a font that was good for dyslexia." And I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I guess like I guess it's like each character is unique enough from the
Mhm.
other characters, and so it's easier to read. But Kathryn was saying they do make other fonts as well for
Yeah.
this purpose. So
Yeah, actually, the reason why Comic Sans is so good is because, for
ah,
example, B and D are not mirrored, so
mhm.
you cannot confuse them.
Oh, nice. Salt just shared in the chat dyslex is it
Yeah, it's
dyslexiefont.com? Okay.
it's not very beautiful too.
It's not. It's all I'm
Mm.
assuming it's like in order to meet these parameters, it cannot be gorgeous.
Actually,
Yeah, you have one?
yeah, the first time I heard about dyslexia at all, I was in the university, and one girl from another university had her diploma on this topic, and she actually created a font, which is really pleasant.
Oh, cool.
I
Okay.
would try
So
to remember.
you're saying keep hunting. There are pleasant dyslexic friendly fonts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
Okay.
sans serif. It's nothing like Comic Sans. And yeah, I'll try to remember the name and maybe I'll post it in the chat.
Thank you. Yeah.
Choose quality fonts because not they'll improve the overall UI, and the kerning is something that is also really important when we talk about typography.
On when you say quality though, I was wondering, because apparently quality does not mean the same thing to everyone. Me and my husband were actually arguing about this last night. I was like, something is quality if I like it. He was like, that's not the definition of quality. Do you have a definition of how do you pick a quality font? Is it like a paid font that will like have all of the different variations, or is it like how do you
Well, it not always paid font equals quality, unfortunately.
Mm,
But yeah, you're right. It's really subjective. So something that I always pay attention to is the kerning. This is the spacing between the letters.
mm.
Um, it needs to be in harmony. I cannot. I don't have a mathematical definition of kerning.
What is it it's text align justify that like spreads everything out randomly. Anytime I accidentally click on that, I'm like, oh.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So do you have in your design systems then an actual like this is the kerning that we follow, or like this is like our line height rule? And
I always define the line height.
okay.
And here, what I have, this is the golden ratio number. I know that a lot of designers use it.
Mm.
These are my magic numbers that I
Nice.
use. So for titles and headers, I use 1.2.
Okay.
What's the math here? If I have the text size, I multiply it by 1.2 if it's a heading, or by 1.5 if
Mm.
it's body text. So it's really easy. It's always a rounded number. I know that some designers multiply it by 1.6, or the golden ratio, but that's my magic
Yeah, yeah.
number, as I mentioned.
Love it.
But also it depends on the font. So
Mm.
yeah, no golden rules. And also something really important is the proper labeling. And what I mean by that is there is also not one right way to create something. For example, here I have shown 3 ways to mark an error state of an input. So the first one is only with color. But if it's only color, then first of all, some people won't even see it. Second of all, you're like, what? What do you want me to do here? Is it do I have an error, or is it
Um,
mandatory, or yeah, what?
yes.
So it's it's a nice thing to have a label, but it's really nice also here to have this non-color visual marker that something's going on. So it's really best to have error icon.
Mm,
And talking about that, I think also for not only for accessibility, but in general for having a quality user experience, you really need to be consistent. And here, if I use a rounded arrow icon, then for warning messages, I will use a triangle and never, mix them, because yeah, it can be confusing. Moving forward to the UI components, a few tips here. First of them is the click area. We should always consider the device that our product will be used or viewed on. So, for example, I like to make a mobile version of the components, which is higher. So I have a wider click area because my thumb is
mm,
bigger than the pointer on my computer. So yeah, maybe this is known for many people, but I'd like to point that out.
mm,
Also, the responsiveness is something really important. And what I mean by that is the way we order the elements. So if on the desktop my image is on the left and other
mm.
content is on the right, I would want them to, move uh, below the image when it.
Not just shrink in the same layout, but adjust. Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I actually I have made mistakes in this direction. And I have really reordered the card, like the image, I put it on the right side and then some text on the left side, completely different layout. But actually, for the readers, it's really hard to to follow the
Yeah.
content. So, and it's hard for development and it's hard to design it in Figma. So why do we need to make our life so hard?
Mm.
Actually, yeah, Figma is a really nice tool that puts us in a frame so we can follow the logical CSS approach, and
Mm.
this is also accessible in a way.
I love that. Does your whole team use Figma?
Yeah, we switched to Figma a year ago,
What were you
maybe.
using before that?
Adobe XD.
Okay. Yeah.
We still have some old stuff there,
Yeah.
but yeah, I know some of my colleagues have experience also with texture and with Sketch, but mainly with Figma.
Okay.
Something also really important is to be consistent with our interactions and to use the same solutions to solve the same problems, regardless of the device or the screen size that we support. This makes the people really familiar with the product, which is accessible but also a good user experience. So
Mm.
yeah, as I mentioned a few times already, for me, really, accessibility means better user experience in general. So yeah, let's improve everybody's experience. And the three key points for me are to keep it simple,
Mm.
um, because we live in really anxious and busy and overwhelming world, and to be honest, most of us, we don't love the products we use. We just, you know, use
Have
them
to.
because we have. Yes. So I believe that our task as designers and developers is to just respect the people's time and to make their experience uncomplicated.
Yeah.
Be consistent. This will really help not only the development team, but but also, yeah, the users will navigate a lot easier and
Mm.
complete tasks much faster. And last but not least, really important to be inclusive, and not only in the web space. We should be inclusive everywhere,
Mm.
you know. And yeah, we need to celebrate that our differences are the key to make great products.
Mm. I love that. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us. Let me see if we have any. Kathryn, will you highlight if we had any questions? I know. Will you be able to join us for our panel in a little bit after our next two guests? I didn't
Oh
know if
yeah, sure.
Yay! Thindle asked pixels versus M's. So do you have a preference?
I always design in pixels.
Yeah, I'm pixels all the way, but I also like I'm on the side of the fence of like M's had their purpose and I feel like the web no longer needs them, but you could definitely argue me out of it, I feel like. So we should talk, Thindle. Actually, I would love to know. You tell us what your preference is. But yes, we will be having an all guest panel at the very end of the stream after two more guests. And so we'll see you back then. But thank you so much for sharing with us. It was a pleasure to have you on, and we'll see you in a
Thank
bit.
you very much for having me. See you later.
See you soon. But yes, I'm very excited for our next guest. Drum roll. Bring to the stage Bekah Rice. Hi, Bekah.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing really well. How are you?
I'm good.
So, our topic today with Bekah, we'll be talking about accessibility for the everyday person. But before we dive in, I was hoping, Bekah, you could do an introduction of yourself to the viewers.
Yeah, of course. Hey, y'all. I'm Bekah Rice. I am a started as a designer and got into development, like I think a lot of designers nowadays kind of do. And that led me down the path of accessibility and then just so much more from there. So I'm at a company called True Matter. We're a usability consultancy. We do everything from user testing, user research, to full builds, development, design. We do a lot. So I really like what we do. Ultimately, the core of that is usability. And for me, usability and accessibility go hand in hand, which
Yeah, we defined earlier from I've been referencing Laura's book Accessibility for Everyone, and she talks about the difference between accessible design versus universal design. And so it sounds like your definition of how usability and accessibility are the same very much line up with, designing for the humans, all of the humans to the
yes.
greatest extent as possible for usability. So I love it. I love that the definitions are starting to line up because it can be a bit overwhelming when you start to look up into this topic because there's a lot of jargon. So
100%.
also I love the hair color. Is it permanent? Because I'm so jelly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I like to change it a lot.
Okay, so yes, we are. I you had so many amazing topics that you could talk about, and I was like, can we have all of them? Yes, we shall have all of them. So, but it makes sense because your job is. It sounds really exciting and
Yeah,
fun that you get to. It's like user testing the world almost, right? Because
yeah,
is it is it very fast paced? Like, is it like we do 5 different companies a week, or is it
yeah.
like longer term?
So it depends. We have lots of clients in lots of different industries, which is something that I really like. I get bored really easily, and so it's
Mm,
really exciting to one day be in just a completely different world. Maybe sitting with pharmacists, watching them do their job to understand how the software they're using is or isn't serving them. And then the next day we'll be
mm,
like talking to a children's museum. So it really runs the gamut. But I like that I get to do different things each day. So it's not always
mm.
fast. Some days I'm just like everyone else. I'm a developer, so I'm just sitting there coding. And other days, I get to do a user test, which is my favorite. So yeah,
Oh,
it's really
that's
fun.
awesome. Very cool. Code It Live. Follow up from the last session. Another great font option is at ADYS font, addiesfont.com. If you want to check it out for dyslexic fonts. I see your slides.
Thank you,
Excellent.
Laura.
All right. Are you ready? You should dye your
Yes,
hair.
yes.
No, Kathryn, I really should. I was actually looking, I found this like Japanese brand that looks like you like massage it in and then blow dry it. And I'm like, because Becca, you were saying you change often. That's the reason I haven't done it. I like if you could just wake up and be like, bloop, now it is blue, right? Then
Yeah, not
obviously,
quite
but
that easy, unfortunately. I wish, but yeah.
and then
I
all
do
the rules of taking care of it. There's so many, like, I'm like, if hair needs rules, do we really want it? Like,
no. There are days I wake up and I'm like, why did I do this? But it's a commitment. Once you're in it, you're in it. I mean, I
You're
don't
in it.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. I'm going to show your slides. Accessibility for everyone. Beautiful. They're looking great.
Yay, glad y'all can see that. So yeah, that's what I'll be talking about today. And I will say, as someone that's neurodivergent, like I do consider myself to be just an everyday person like you guys. I think this was a really interesting exercise putting this together because it made me think about beyond just the usability accessibility sides, which I've already said go hand in hand, and really thinking about the everyday things that I take for granted that are used on good usable accessible sites. And so like trying to think through those and how they benefit me on a day-to-day basis was really interesting because a lot of this seems like really straightforward and just like, well, duh, yeah, that's a good practice. But really picking it apart and thinking about like what my internet usage day to day would be like without some of these basic things that I think we take for granted. So I already
Mm,
introduced myself and Bekah Rice and with True Matter. We talk a lot about it, about accessibility and about usability because it impacts so many people. Estimated 1.3 billion. This is about 15% of the population. So not only when we talk about usability, accessibility, not only are we talking about you and me and our friends and family, but this is a huge chunk of folks that have permanent disabilities. This number doesn't include short-term or temporary disabilities, which I'll talk about a little bit later, because I think it's really underestimating how many people just regularly have to deal with some new crazy thing in their life that's making it harder for them to use their phone, their
Yeah.
computer. So I just thought that was interesting. Whenever I look at this stat, I'm like, will it update soon? Will it get bigger? Because I think just the number of days like that I've, broken my wrist or, like
Mm.
was busy and I had my hands full and I was trying to do something. And so I'll give more examples like that. But as I already said, I feel really strongly that accessibility really is usability. Like it equates to better usability. And so whenever we make a product accessible, we're almost always making it more usable for everyone. It's just kind of a no-brainer, at least in my mind. So some of the
Mm.
benefits, how do they impact us? We're just going to look at a few of those. A big one is accessible digital products save us time, which we all wish we had a ton more of. And anytime, outside of like social media, streaming sites, entertainment, and news apps, we're usually just using the web to get something done, like completing a task or finding some piece of information. And typically, accessible products are going to make that easier for us to quickly find what we're looking for and get stuff done. And I'm going to say accessible here because that is what we're talking about. But as I've already said, like accessibility and usability to me are the same thing. So if a product is accessible, it's going to be usable. So those products typically, to be accessible, they have to have these things. So headings are, I think, something we, again, take for granted. If you've ever been presented a wall of text and had to find one piece of information out of that, it really can be a struggle, especially if you're in a hurry, especially if you're on a phone. And having headings to quickly scan through it's a necessity. So that's a really big one. Good spacing and grouping. And I'll give some visual examples of these. Well labeled, very obvious links. I think one of the interesting things, I'm going to date myself, but like when flat design, was like introduced, it was actually kind of a struggle for some people because buttons didn't look as clickable. They just didn't look like a thing that drew your eye to take an action on. So I think it's really important whenever we're thinking about, how we design links and buttons that we're making sure that they appear to be very clickable and actionable. Good contrast, which last talk was a little bit about that. That can be crucial, not just for those with low vision or with uh, or have trouble seeing certain kinds of colors, but can be really important just for like being outside on your phone on a sunny day. So, like you'll turn off the contrast on your screen, make it brighter so that you can see. Any site or app that has good contrast is already just got to be better and easier for you to use. Larger text. So this one I think is tricky because as a designer, like I think typography, I like contrast and sizing of type, and that also helps you show hierarchy. But as a rule of thumb, I feel like anytime I'm designing anything, if I'm using text that's smaller than 16 pixels or 16 points, someone's going to struggle. And actually, it's probably going to be me as I'm getting older, have to break out the readers. So it's really handy when a site's already designed with larger text and I don't have to zoom in and embarrass myself. But that's a big one. And then line length is another that I think, it's kind of design 101 coming out of school. I remember, if you want something to be legible, it shouldn't be more than this many characters. But it's something that we can lose sight of, especially when we're designing apps that are like full screen, which is really popular right now. And that text can just go on for days.
Go for days.
And like I'm looking at my presenter notes and I'm like, they're too wide. I can't read them. And I didn't think about that. So in practice, I'm now, seeing what I said. So here's a good example. Our content strategist, Bailey Lewis, she now has a great program called Words First. I think she mocked this up for a talk she did about how important, just headings and having a logical structure to your content is. So this is the bus for Columbia, like our public transit system. And this is their contact page. And it has a form at the bottom, believe it or not, but it's not really very useful because it's just like, if you have questions or comments, here you go. What they do have in here that you can kind of see is phone numbers, which are really important. So we quickly just mocked up in the browser, like, what if we added headings? And already it's a million times better. You can quickly see, okay, if I need to ask a question about the route, here's the phone number. I don't have to read the wall of text. So that's to me kind of a given, a really easy one. But again, it's something that we take for granted and that hopefully most accessible sites are utilizing because that is a requirement of WCAG. The next one, and again, I apologize if anyone's ever worked on anything I'm showing. I'm not trying to like call out bad work because I think we all have good intentions and we're all trying our best. But these are just some things that like I very quickly like just kind of came upon and was like, I should save this as an example. So this one, the designer in me was like, this is beautiful. Like these icons are great. They actually make sense, which is something that's very hard to do when you have this much content that you're trying to associate with an icon. But I have a really hard time scanning things when they're centered like this, especially lists. So this would be a good example of just grouping and how, utilizing columns can help a ton here. I also think alphabetizing this would help a lot. And so in general, whenever we're thinking about our layout, I know, again, as a designer, there's like kind of this fine line. I'll talk about that more, where you want to innovate, you want to be creative, but at the same time, you could end up sacrificing usability, accessibility as a result. And so while the other one is really pretty, I think this one is a lot more, a lot easier to scan. This next one I feel a little bit bad about. I stumbled across this and I didn't do a mock-up of how to make it better because there's just a lot going on. Here, this is a great example of labeling links. So technically, Sarah mentioned earlier, technically, this is accessible. I did look at the code. And so those view course buttons, they're not all the links. It's actually the whole card, which is great. But what you can't see here is these like hours and minutes and seconds count down. So like they're moving the whole time. And for someone like me, like I get so distracted by any type of little movement on the screen and there's no way to turn it off here. I even have like the reduce motion like preference set in my browser and I still like could see these moving constantly. I also thought it was really hard to see these headings because they're on top of an image. And I think that you can do that if it has really strong contrast, but here for some of these images, it doesn't quite work. And the fact that they're bottom aligned makes it really hard to scan because again, our eyes kind of want to start at the top, go to the left and come back down. And so here, when I have like headings that are different heights, I feel like that's a little difficult. And again, I didn't try to fix this one because there's a lot going on. This next one I think is actually better than the last time I looked at it. I feel like a lot of people use the Zara site as an example of don't do this. But here we've got contrast issues, we've got navigation issues. And these are things that I think, like, again, we all have the best intentions. And as designers, we want to innovate, we want to be creative. But when we start ignoring common patterns and like best practices, it can get kind of dicey. And here, like this site, it does so many interesting things. There's a lot of video. It's actually very beautiful. Like aesthetically, it's nice. But when I click that search bar, I can't type in it. It takes me to a search page that I then have to type into.
Oh, no, it does not.
Yes. It's very strange.
No.
The navigation opens like a panel and then you have to scroll horizontally to see the full navigation.
But
Yeah,
but
there's
you
just
have to admit, Bekah, it's a sexy site.
it's
Like you
yeah,
look at
it's
it,
beautiful.
like as a design person, I'm like, yeah, I put that up on my wall. And I think that's where the struggle
100%.
is. Because you want to make
Yes,
something that's beautiful, but like if it's not functional or usable by the masses, I
exactly.
guess it just doesn't hit the mark.
Yeah, and I won't dig
Oh.
into that little accessibility icon there in the corner. Um, I
Oh,
have very strong
what does
feelings.
it do? Does it
Oh,
take
it's
you
a
to like a
whole
page about it's a
no,
thing.
it's a whole little tool that's supposed to suddenly make all of it accessible and all the bad stuff that they're doing go away. Um, it's an easy button essentially, and we know those don't exist.
Yeah, right. I
So I
gotcha.
like that they're thinking about it. That's great. But I love this example too because we're talking about usability and accessibility benefiting everyone. So the fact that they have this option to improve their accessibility means nothing because the site just by itself for someone that doesn't need those assistive tools, it's hard to use. So sorry, Zara. I love your brand, but so yeah, saving us time, I think, is one of the biggest benefits to accessible digital products. Another one is just reducing errors. So again, when we're online, other than streaming entertainment stuff, we're usually trying to complete an action. A lot of times that involves forms, unfortunately. But whenever we're trying to get something done, there are key benefits to some of this functionality. So a keyboard support is a really big one. If you've ever like injured your hand or wrist using a mouse, especially if you're a Mac person like me, that magic mouse is completely unusable if you're injured, and you never know when that's going to happen. I've also worked with a lot of clients where they were using internal tools with a lot of data entry, a lot of spreadsheets, and they don't even have a mouse. Most of them on their setup, they're just using their keyboard because it's more efficient. Anything with spacing, I think we've all, as we've kind of I kind of was started in the industry when responsive was like a new thing. And so I remember like all the different studies about spacing and how far apart things should be for tappability. That's something that's probably kind of like second nature to us now, but it does often get overlooked when we have like really dense, a lot of data entry type apps where we'll put little context menus and all these kinds of things because we don't want them to take the priority from some other action that's really important. But those typically can be the hardest things to interact with on a touch device. Timers, I don't think there's any argument for this ever. And yet I'm still upset with Ticketmaster.
Are you finding them often? I feel like you're like, I'm like, where are all these timers? Why does she get to
It's
find them? Like,
yeah. I actually am glad I don't see them that often, but anytime
okay.
you buy tickets for anything, I know Ticketmaster uses them. There are a couple other platforms that I've seen them on for like buying festival tickets. And I get it because things are selling out. They're trying to make sure you're actually in it and you mean it. But it's awful. It stresses me out to no end. Like it just immediate anxiety when I see one. So those are bad for everyone. They're just bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Label form fields. So this one I also think is something that uh, again, from like a design perspective, sometimes you're trying to keep certain things minimal and not to distract from other more important tasks. And so it's easy to be like, oh, let's just, we don't need a label. Let's put the little search icon in the bar. People will know what that's for. And sometimes that is okay. But I think ultimately, if anyone ever has to think about it, you failed. You shouldn't be doing it. So unless it's not the most obvious, this is what this field does, I think it always needs a label. And we know for accessibility, it always has to have a label. So there are ways to do that where you don't see it. And yes, I've done that
It's
plenty
like
too.
you go
But
to the 10 more steps in order to hide the label. Like,
yes, you do. And if you're having to do that, I feel like that kind of tells you that gives you the answer. Like this might not be the best approach here. But I know, for the sake of the design, and you only have so much space to work with, that sometimes you have to prioritize how these things are going to work. Field masks are also another big one. I don't want to think about the format you want me to enter. Just tell me, show me, or even better, if you can actually force whatever I enter to fit that, great. You just saved me so much time, and there's less chance I'm going to get an error. And then error messages. I think this is the thing I see done wrong the most. I think it's also the hardest thing to do. Like designing and building forms is just hard. And no one likes to interact with them. Like we don't like to fill out long forms online. Totally agree. But I don't think it has to be painful. I actually have a pattern that I use for every form. This is where, again, I want to be creative. I want to innovate. I'm a designer. But this thing works. I have user tested it to death. Every test that we have done, we've tried putting labels in different places, putting errors in different places, adjusting the styling, and it just works. This is my go-to. So it saves me time as a designer because I'm like, I have the perfect pattern. I'll just, rebrand it for whatever this product is. But error is going to be at top. The field level errors are going to be above the field. It works. And I think it's easy with forms to get creative there because we hate them so much that we like, well, if I do it this way, it'll make it better, but it'll make it feel more approachable. I think that's a big one. And it's risky sometimes, I have seen some new things that I like, where we've got kind of, instead of a wizard, it's like a step by step on the whole screen. I think that's cool. But this is a good pattern. This just works, and it works for everyone. We've user tested it with folks that are disabled and with those that aren't, and it has universally just been fine. There is a lot behind the scenes, obviously, from a code perspective, that makes this super accessible. But for those that are just seeing it at face value here, it's very obvious what needs to be done. I'm being told how to fix it, and I think that's crucial. Got a nice little Kendo UI example here, just of a mask, because some people I think people call it different things. So I always give an example just in case they're like, what are you talking about? Because you kind of forget that these exist until you're interacting with a forum or building one. And you're like, oh yeah, that's really handy. I don't have to struggle with tons of validation to make this work because I'm forcing whatever they enter to match the format that I want. Big fan of that. So ultimately, saving time, big bonus, reducing errors, awesome. But really, just accessibility in general accommodates our lives, our crazy lives, where things happen that we don't expect. And we suddenly find ourselves unable to do the things that we can on a regular basis. So I'd already kind of talked about short-term and situational disabilities. Just real quickly, short-term is, broken limb, concussion. If I just had surgery, I'm recovering. And then situational is a little different. So that's caused by a set of circumstances that are temporary. but that can happen to any one of us at any given time. So this could be getting your eyes dilated at the eye doctor, which I hate so much because it's just miserable the next couple hours.
Is it
Um,
is it required for everyone, like, yearly? Like, is that a thing?
so
Because like, I have
I
to do
don't
it
know.
yearly, but I'm like,
I do too.
does everybody do this?
I question them every time. I'm like, didn't we just do this like yesterday? Because years go by so quickly for me now. But yeah, I think if you wear glasses or contacts, they make you do it every year, and it is my least favorite thing because I
Hmm.
I suddenly have low vision after that happens. I can't use my phone. I can't see the things and do the things I want to do. So
Mm.
I zoom in. I'm like sitting there using my browser zoom, and it's something that someone with low vision would just be used to. But because again,
But,
this
like,
is a
in dark mode,
situational.
right?
Yeah,
Because it's so
that's another one I'm gonna have as an example. But it could be again like you have like one arm, you're holding a kid, and as any new parent knows, like you're always holding that new baby, and so you are doing everything. You are a one-handed ninja. You can just do everything on your phone one-handed, and it's awesome. And being able to do that takes time, so it's really great. If a site is accessible, it's already built for someone that might have mobility issues or not be able to use both of their hands or their fingers. So it's already going to accommodate for that. And then, we've all been loud environment, trying to watch a video like in a public place, captions. Like now it's just a thing we see. It used to be kind of novel. And I feel like now people aren't even really doing it for accessibility. It's like because they're sharing it on social and they know that people are going to be watching this just about anywhere and they might not have their headphones. So this allows you to still engage with that content. Driving is also another good one. So all of these things support those instances, whether they're temporary or situational disabilities. So, keyboard support, we already kind of talked about how big that is, caption and transcripts. I am the kind of person, like if I'm trying to learn something, I would much rather read a transcript than watch a video. I know I'm kind of weird in
Mm.
that. But I think it's just really handy to be able to skim through and to find the information I'm looking for that way.
Mm.
Light and dark mode, which you brought up, is awesome. Like the fact that, if I have a migraine or I'm trying not to wake up my partner, I can be on my phone in dark mode and it's not like this blaring, glowing light in the room. And then like speech commands, talk to text. I feel like this is something that's very specific to the type of task you're trying to do or the type of app. But that's really handy. We all do it while driving, hopefully. Talk to text is great. I remember before where, like my mom would pull over to text because that just wasn't an option and she wanted to be safe.
Right.
So that's something that day to day we're all using and taking advantage of, but we don't really think about them as being things for accessibility. They're just things that make it easier to use these products. And then I think speed and optimization is another one people don't always think about. But having bug-free code, like valid HTML, what's rendered after the fact, is a requirement of accessibility. So like you have to
Mm.
build things that work because it's accessible. So that's something that we all benefit from. Again, if you have a bad connection, things that load efficiently and responsive. I think mobile first design is still I don't even think we should use that term anymore because it's just design. We know that we have to live with smaller devices. And so we're thinking about those. Hopefully, like that's the priority. And I know that a lot of folks with different disabilities actually, and this has been studied, actually use a phone more than a desktop computer or only
Mm.
use a phone. So it's not, and
Mm.
that's probably like more of a thing even just for us. We know mobile usage on most apps and sites is higher than desktop, definitely higher than tablet. So
And I
thinking
think it's
through
not
that,
even in the way that we think, because a lot of mobile designs used to be for when you're on the go, but
yep.
because a lot of people are just primarily using a mobile device, period, it might be at home on really great
Oh yeah.
internet or what like, whatever, like, just working, and so I
Yeah.
think, it's we definitely should I love that you said we should just call it design, and I
It's
look
just
forward to the
design
day
now.
that that, like, usability is just also included in that, and it's just design, right? Like
Yep. It's just good design and it's just accessibility. It's a huge part of that. So yeah, I know that was just a lot of things and it's very high level. But it was interesting to think through this to try to think outside of my accessibility hat of this is just a requirement so that people can use it. And think about how it affects me and like the things that I'm trying to do every day. And it's a huge benefit. So accessible sites great for all of us. So I have a link if you want to read more articles about this. We cover a lot of
Oh,
this type of
yay.
stuff. But yeah, I appreciate you having me. I know we
I
have a little
love
more
that.
time, so
Thank you so much. I have a question from Fuel, I think it was. See, here it is. So Phil was asking earlier during your presentation, we really struggle with error messages from integrations. They happen often quite a lot later than when the user interacted with the data and also not localized. Any tips?
That one's rough. I feel for you. Anytime you have to do like server side validation on stuff, I know that that can be a problem because it takes a while, or can
Mm,
take a while. And I've seen all kinds of things where like, oh, all we get back from this old app that we built is a code, and then on the front end, we're having to like translate that into a message. So I don't have any great solutions. I have a pretty solid pattern that I showed that I think works in just about any
mm,
development language. Um, but yeah, it's I think as long as you're communicating to the user, hey, something's happening, that is important. That's one thing that we see a lot in testing is if a form takes too long for anything to happen, like a success message, people will just they'll leave, they'll just bail, they assume it's broken. So anything you can do
yeah,
to tell the user, hey, we're doing a thing, you're gonna find out if it worked in a minute. That's gonna help them stick with it.
yeah, I love that. Thank you, chat. Phil said, "Is that true for all apps? Are all apps always used more than phones? Used more for phones?" That's a good
Not
question.
necessarily. Like I've anytime that we redesign anything for one of our clients, we look at their analytics and usage in general. And there are some cases
Mm,
where a whole section of someone's site might only be used on desktop because it's like people like me, like doing it for work, they're going there to like look
mm,
at something specific. But for the majority of sites and apps, I would say mobile usage is higher than desktop. And especially
mm,
when it comes to accessibility, disabled people are primarily using their phones, and
mhm,
specifically iPhones because they're built really well with accessibility in mind.
mm. That's good to know. All right, let's see if we have any other questions. I think that's all the questions for now. Will you be able to join us for the panel after our next guest? I didn't know if you had
Yeah, looking
awesome.
forward to it.
Yay! Well, thank you so much for presenting, Becca.
Oh,
Honestly,
thank
I
you.
am really not only the slides, they were just very conscious. Like I could tell, like the work that went into
It
making
is
them.
an accessible
Like
presentation. Yeah.
yes, I tip my hat to you, madam. But thank you for coming on, and I'll see you very shortly in 30 minutes for the panel.
Thanks, y'all. See you soon.
Without further ado, I'm going to bring on the amazing Dan Denney. Hi, Dan.
Hey,
Oh my gosh, it's been a hot second. How are you?
doing well, doing well. How about you?
Same. Let us get into it. I'm so excited to talk with you, Dan. Dan and I go way back. I used to work with him at Code School, actually, and I learned a lot from him back in the day whenever I was just getting started out. And so, whenever we were talking about this accessibility stream and we wanted it to primarily focus on the design side, I instantly thought of you and was like, can we please have you on? So, I'll let you do an introduction for yourself, and then let's get into the content.
Sure, sure, sure. Yeah, so my name is Dan. I am a software engineer at DataCamp. Though most of my career, I've been a front end engineer. And then
Okay.
for the past 12 years or so, I've been in online education oriented startups and companies, working on mainly on the marketing side of things.
And have a you also have a conference, correct?
I
That
do. Yeah, so I run a conference called the Front End Design Conference. Had run it from 2009 to 2014, and then some other people took it over. But then we brought it
Mm.
back this year in 2024, which is so fun.
Oh, excellent. Was it good?
Oh, it
I'm
was
I'm so
amazing.
sad
Yeah,
to have I was like I found out after, like, I was like, "Wait, they brought it? Oh, no." So, like, I if it comes back next year, I will for sure be there
the
because
people have
I
spoken, and I think we will have
the
another.
people have spoken. You gotta love it when the people speak. Oh, so Dan, I am so like this has been such a really cool day. We've talked through implementation not always being enough. Sometimes you miss the mark when you try to tack something on at the end. We've talked through building accessibility into your design systems and how that helps everyone on the team. And then our last guest, Bekah Rice, was talking about accessibility for the everyday person and how it benefits not just those with disabilities. And so I'm excited for ours where we get to talk about improving accessibility on an existing platform because this is one that a couple of guests have brought up so far about retrofitting, and I would love to hear just your thoughts and experiences around that.
Yeah, yeah. And so I intentionally didn't do slides because I knew there was going to
Yeah.
be a lot of information up front in front of me. and it's a
Mm.
lot. It's daunting, and
Mm.
the topic that we're going to talk about right now is daunting too. You're an individual contributor. You've attended this today. You have all these ideas. You're going to go back to work tomorrow. It may not be a company-wide initiative for you to be working on this. How can you start to make improvements like going forward? And it is a retrofitting thing that like was discussed earlier too,
Mm.
which rightfully so is a very hard thing to do. But I figured we could chat about more kind of like experience of the past and like kind of like some of the modern tools, things that we can use to do this starting tomorrow
No, I
or
love it.
today
I
for
think
everybody.
that's yeah. I think that's a really good way of looking at it. So I'm very excited. You had mentioned when we were emailing that a lot of like anytime well, a lot of times that you've used accessibility, it's been in the retrofitting manner. Is that just because a lot of applications are just they're already started or it was a quick implementation or like I'm curious as to the like the ecosystems that you've hopped on
Yeah,
into.
I don't know. I'm not trying to like put it as an excuse or anything, but I do think at least a few of the companies that I work for were startups, right? So they were
Mm,
in the initial stage of like, can we do this? And can this be a thing that exists? And so all the work is going up towards like really just achieving whatever you can. And then as a
mm,
maturity level hits to that product or a code or some or the code base itself or the product like maturity matures, you start to say like, okay, well now we need to make this actually work for everybody because we proved we can do it. It is a real thing, and we've got to go forward. And then even then, sometimes it wasn't maybe a company-wide initiative to hit some of these things. I did work on
mm,
one educational tool that back in the day when you were trying to use code in the browser, the tools that were available were not accessible at all. And that was actually a very challenging thing from working on the marketing side. If you're like, how accessible and how much should we make it saleable that this thing
mm.
works when the end product actually isn't accessible. Luckily, those things have come a long way since then, which is very good.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I am very grateful to that, and I wonder if that's a big part of the movement, I guess the reason because a lot of developers are expecting this of employers and products, moving forward, and so I wonder if it is because the tooling is finally it has arrived. It's like that day when, like, I feel like web standards arrived and we were all like, "Aha, we have achieved it," right? But I've
I think the Microsoft team pushed a lot for it, like with some of
Mm.
their like. I don't know exactly the reasoning, but it seems like their team open sourcing a lot of tools kind of helped push that forward.
Yeah, Becca said the tools we use are sadly usually the least accessible.
It's very very true too.
Oh. Oh, Fuel said that here in Norway right now. Sorry, I didn't get the shout out earlier to where Oh, so I on accessibility and existing platforms, the tooling's gotten easier. Do you have tools that you wanted to give a shout out to of like, "I love this
Yes,
thing," or "I
absolutely.
swear by that thing"?
And I think it's like kind of like one of the things that you want to like grab early on. So I'll give the one that I use, but I think just
Yeah.
finding a tool that you can use to test whether or not the thing that you just built is
Mm,
accessible is like something that you want to find. The one
mm,
that I use most consistently is Axe. So
mm,
that's AXE. So there's what I used it for initially was just I would use it as a browser extension. So you continue, like you build out a new page or a new section of a page or something like that, add a new UI element, and then you fire up the tool in the extension so that you can actually go down through and be like, did the thing that I just built, is it accessible? Have I added any regressions? Have I done anything uh, bad? Or is there anything I need to double check? And you can do that just by yourself. You don't have to worry about whether or not it's a company wide thing or anything. You can just test your work right away. The beautiful thing about that also is once this is a company wide initiative or a team initiative or something like that, it has automated uh, options so that you can now hook it up to every PR is going to get tested to make sure that
mm.
you're hitting the level at which you're agreeing that you're going to hit and that you're not adding regressions like along the way.
And regressions, I'm assuming, is taking a step backward in the
Yeah, so like
usability?
maybe right now our homepage is passing at like what we agree at like like 2.1 AA level type of thing, but now you add a new button and someone missed like color ratio, it's a new style or something like that, and now you're actually failing that, you're not meeting it across the whole page.
I see.
And so like this will catch those types of things very commonly. Something will get missed, like alt text doesn't get put on an image, and now
Mm,
technically you would be failing. And so that can either be coming from like a CMS or it could be a code thing, but it will
yeah.
catch those types of things and say like you're now failing the page.
Okay. So Axe is used at it's like the pre-shipped to prod, but like implementation phase of like,
Yeah,
okay,
it can be. Yeah, like you could also just jump onto any website right now and just run the extension and just get
run it.
an idea for what is
Okay.
happening there. But the most beneficial way is if you're using it before something makes it to production so that you can get your problem
I love
solved.
that. I love that. Yeah, Fuel was saying regression. Things used to work, but now they don't.
Yes.
I like to do today is all about defining the obvious. Oh, okay. So, more on accessibility.
Yeah.
I'm thinking through so can you tell me a bit about your day-to-day as far as the terms, because what I wrote a design engineer blog post recently because the term's blowing up, and it really to me screams what I was trained a developer is, which is interesting, because I was trained that developers do design too, and that they think about things like typography and contrast and usability. But I guess it wasn't. I guess not everyone was taught these things, and so I would love to hear a bit about your day to day and like what parts of the process you touch, and what team members you work with, and if it is difficult to sew accessibility into that.
Yeah, sure. I'm very fortunate in the moment. So I am a software engineer on the conversion engineering team. So
Mm,
what that for the most part that means I work on the marketing site. So like the first
mm,
touch for all of the stuff. And in that we have a design system, but the design system is a little bit more tailored towards the product. So, and our design system is an accessibility first solution, so they care about it. We go for WCAG or WCAG 2.1
mm,
AA. So they like the stuff that you're going to get from the design system is solved. But there are designs, and designs are you're going to implement something, and those are not using the design system because the marketing side doesn't adhere only to the design system. So we are building out a lot of things, and you have various amounts of designers that are going to create things in them. And like you said, there are varying amounts of knowledge of like these types of things. And so to me, like that's where it kind of comes in on knowing these things, attending things like this, learning these things, and then taking all of those things one PR at a time. So I got this. I'm going to implement this. I might find some problems with it, and at that point, I might push those back and say like, "Hey, I ran this, and like the color contrast isn't right for like this background and this text, or we need this whatever in order to go
mm.
forward." And then sometimes it can just be like, "Hey, this is failing. Can I get a new one?" This. Yeah.
I often struggle with this in my work of like, where is the line of I shall just fix it for you and then show it to you versus I'm going to delegate this entire thing as a redo in your camp. And I really struggle with that. I feel like it's maybe how much time you have for teaching moments. I'm not, do you have a good line for that, or is it just where time is at?
Time. Yes, like,
Time.
everything
Yeah.
comes down to time, right? And if it's a short amount of time to fix it, and I would say, like, that can be, like, I can get this better in under 30 minutes or something like that, then
Right.
you're
Right.
good. But if it's
Yeah.
like, "Hey, I'm gonna have to reinvest almost designing this,
Mm.
backwards," then I'm gonna have to say, "Hey, I do need a new version of this because, like, I want you to say how it should look." Because like, sometimes
Yeah.
it's a bigger deal. It's not like the contrast is off, but you changing it is going to make it look a way that wasn't intended also.
Right.
And so, like, it's probably them finding a better solution of, like, "Here's how I
Yeah.
can tackle this problem differently than I
Yeah.
did."
I love that. Becca said, for a lot of our clients, their marketing teams really struggle to keep the content they post and updated accessible
Yeah.
PDFs, especially. The struggle is real.
Yeah, yeah. But like
Mm.
PDFs are like as soon as you get out of anything that you can automatically test, everything goes awry also. Then it really has to be that the person creating it was thinking about all these things and
Just
or
thinking about it.
using tools within like Figma or whatever tool they used it. Figma for a PDF a lot of time will probably be something else, but just using the
Yeah.
extension tools in there that can help with
Oh,
those.
yeah. Absolutely. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about real world projects and
Yeah.
if you've ever maybe dealt with a client that didn't care about accessibility or a team or a project.
Yeah, 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 for sure. I mean, like in the companies that I've worked for in the past, it's not care. Like I don't want to say they didn't care. I'm just saying like the incentive wasn't there always to like make it a priority.
Mm,
I feel like there are things in the world now that are fixing that incentive all the way across the board. So, like all across the EU, there are like standards that are being raised, which like improve things. In the US, we have a different approach where like there's lawyers that like sue companies for not having accessible websites, which overall raises the bar. We did
right.
see a solution earlier in one of the talks that talks about the overlays that are to me are probably a direct result of that because companies can kind of just
Mm,
use the overlay solution and protect themselves in some kind of way. But we all know that like that isn't like what's actually making the thing better for people.
mm,
And so real world solutions, it's really just learning these things on your own and applying them on your own. But the good thing is like when you do that kind of thing and you share your reasoning, like in a PR,
mm,
like, hey, could you uh, make this link 40 by 40 so
mm,
that it's an accessible link instead of just like the like the 16 pixel icon is clickable. Like it's like little things like that if you just put them in the right framing and like
mm.
sometimes just leave a reference like this is why I'm kind of like suggesting it.
Yeah.
You'll show that you care about it and then other people will start to care about it. And then
So have you noticed that waterfall effect
oh
then
yeah,
of like I drawing the line in the sand, right? Requesting whether it's sending the design back or sending right a pull request back and like, hey, look at this.
yep,
And then later on down the line, not having to keep repeating those things because people are like getting on board,
yep.
like you've seen
A
it.
lot of times more with designers. I feel it doesn't happen
Mm,
as often as PRs, but like if you're working with a designer who you usually have some kind of relationship, whether that's just a repeated working thing or like an
mm,
actual real like collaboration relationship, like if you keep pushing back over time, it's just natural. They're either going to care about it or they're going to just not want the design to get pushed back on and they will start
yeah.
to like
Oh,
use
I see. Oh, okay. So it doesn't end in a screaming match.
no, no,
It's
no, it's just incentives, right? Like, they either just want the work to be done once they
right.
hand it to you,
Yeah.
or they care about it now too, and they've learned something, they're excited about it, and then
Yeah.
you'll see changes happening along
I
the way
love
as
that.
well.
Oh, that's so cool, Dan. I love
We
that.
also one really wonderful thing is, like, we have teammates with, because, like, accessibility is a spectrum. There's people, it's like it affects people in all different types of way. I know this got discussed earlier. But, like one of the things that people instantly start thinking of when you hear it is like, oh, just like a screen reader or something like that. But it's like it's all kinds of things. It's like I have the thing, it's super, super minor, but like blue and red on top of each other is hot
Mm,
and it moves if I see it. So like that's something like I notice in designs and stuff like that.
mm,
But there's all these types of things, and we have people all throughout the company that have various levels of needs. And so like
mm,
it's you can kind of they get first person, like people that they really know and work with, they get information from them, which is a beneficial thing. Also, anytime you can share feedback in the company, like I don't know if everyone has like MPS tools and all that kind of stuff. Anytime you can share those types of things in the company and someone mentions that like some solution made them be able to use it,
mm.
is a win that will touch people in a way that like, oh, I'm going to care about this
Yeah,
as I move forward.
yeah.
we've seen it lately a lot more in localization than we have like in people that have said something in accessibility. But um, it's been mentioned a couple times today that usability and accessibility are very, very closely related, and making something usable for someone in a different language that isn't English first is a beneficial thing too.
Yeah. I like though that point about it's almost like humanizing it and giving it like an example of this affected me positively, right? And then
Yeah.
it almost helps spread the fire because it's no longer a speck on a page, the checklist, right? It's a
Yeah.
person being affected. So Fuel said localization. I ought to be able to put in my real name in a text box and it doesn't.
Oh, that's a
It just reminds me of, in Laura's book, she gives an example about, like, an I-18N, like, fail of, do you know the KFC story? Where
oh no.
they made their website and, instead of having it translated, they decided to just use localization, and they shipped it in China, but unfortunately, their slogan, I guess, "Finger licking good" came across as, "Will bite your fingers off," was the how it and so it was very much like a and so Laura warns of like, just keep it simple. Like if you're going to use, like internationalization and localization, like keep your text as simple as possible, which helps other usability matters as well, if keeping
Oh,
things
yeah.
as simple as possible. Um,
It's a
but
good point though, because it actually falls back to using like the testing tools and stuff like that too. Because it's
mm,
like there are machines that can solve all of these things, but at the end of the day, you then also have to like be able to like humanize it as well, right?
yeah.
Because like yeah, the test fails, but that doesn't mean like you can instantly just change a color value and it's going to be okay, the test passed, so now we're good. You do sometimes have to evaluate now, like if I change the size of this thing or if I change the color of this thing, how does that impact the other areas and how
Yeah.
does that affect the overall usability of the form or something like that along
No,
the way.
absolutely.
So,
No, yeah, it is very much a trickle effect of like, at least I feel often it's not as simple as, just slap a different color on it, my sir, and ship it. Although I feel like some people think it can be. I've seen it. I have a question for you around accessibility feedback, especially with design where devs don't often feel comfortable offering critique. Do you have any feedback as far as, like, how to give feedback? Feedback for feedback giving.
uh,
Aha.
oh yeah, this will be hard, right? And this is I'm coming from a perspective of being a like implementing designs on the web for now 16 years, right?
Mm,
But and I know that's easy for me to say in this moment, maybe not as easy for other people to feel, but you absolutely should give feedback. Every engineer, when you're looking at something, should give feedback. Not your personal, whether or not you like something type of feedback, but if you can see that something is off and it's not going to work, you should give feedback. And I see that as um, it's a regular challenge, and I think I
mm,
don't know exactly know why, but most of the engineers that I work with view designers as if they are on a pedestal and they have thought through all of these things and they've checked all the boxes and um, they now like just take this and do exactly what they said.
mm,
But they're busy two people too. They have various levels of understanding and various levels, and so you can complement each other by giving feedback.
mm,
And then both of you will grow because you may be working with a designer that hasn't attended some of these types of things or looked into accessibility and maybe hasn't focused on those types of things, but you have, and now you give that information and then go back and forth.
yeah,
I think it's just, to me, it's all collaboration. It's just, you always are both working together to take a thing that was created in a non web atmosphere to make it go on the web and make it work for as many people as possible.
yeah. Fuel was saying, as a backend dev, I have been told not to have an opinion on design and front end. And I feel like Becca's saying, I'm sorry to hear that. Let me
Yeah.
see. Our backend dev, Ken, has given me some of the best feedback over the years. Getting different perspectives always makes things better. And I think that Becca really touched on this as far as like it being a whole team effort, like you just said, of like we are all collaborating together, bringing our different, whether it's our own different like viewpoints of what a disability is or what accessibility is, but as well as like our experiences to the table. I think maybe I've worked with some designers that similarly feel had that vibe, and it was more a territorial thing of
Mhm.
like they um I suppose they didn't want too many hands in their blackberry pie. That was a horrible way of saying it.
To me, it's though it's like data wins, right? So like what you
Mm,
can't ever do is say like I don't like green and like,
mm,
or I just don't like the way this looks. Like you can't give that, but you can absolutely say like here's a couple like articles on why we shouldn't use red for this button that is like a continuing action.
yeah,
Or here's like, just an accessibility test of like these two colors aren't readable for this number of people, or these colors cause this problem for like this number of people.
yeah.
Um,
No, absolutely.
Font size types of things. So one of the most popular things that you'll get is like a font, like someone wants to put like legal text in like 8 pixels or something like that. And
Mm.
like, like kind of things you just have to push through and just be like, this isn't my opinion. I know it actually looks good, but we really shouldn't do this because of this
Right.
reason. Kind of
No,
thing.
that's honestly that's my hardest part. And Kathryn said it earlier of I'm gonna try to find your message, Kathryn, about art because we were on the Zara site and to me, like those are the designs that I always hate killing. Because
Yeah.
Kathryn said art is for experimenting, pushing boundaries, creating something beautiful, or challenging just for creativity's sake. And she has this like Kathryn and I, like, view the world in this same lens of, like, "Look at how amazing everything" like, "Oh, did you examine this?" Like but she also said, "But design has to work," and I think this is, like, where it comes down for me of, like, "Oh, right." Like, "Ugh,
Yeah.
I wish it didn't." Like
I'm the exact same way, like, because I'm, I love design. I'm a design-oriented engineer, and I love creating beautiful things, but
Yeah,
there are times where something beautiful doesn't work, and,
yeah,
like, you have to give the feedback, and then you have to hope that you can implement it in a different way.
and it's like Bekah said with her form, how she has a form
Yep.
formula of, like,
I love
this form
that.
I know, I was like, I felt very humbled by that because I am the person who always reinvents a form, always. I'm
Yeah.
like, "But how could we push the boundaries of what it means to be a form?" Right? And there's just, like, a lot of times that in that case, usability for different, groups of people goes out the window, and so I feel like there are great times to reach for tried and true formulas for whether it's forms or whether it's other parts
Absolutely.
of UI design and development, because
The
when
user testing part of that was so important too, right? Because if you wanna
Mm.
get humbled on your work, talk with users that are using the things that you're building
Do you
because,
remember how we first met, Dan? Do you remember that
yeah,
story?
like from the yeah, from,
I was I was before I worked at Code School and Dan was helping run a user test and I came for the free dinner and I was in college and I was user testing and the first interaction I ever had with Dan, he came over to my computer and he was like, "What did you do?" And I was like, "I'm sorry." Right? Didn't know this man from Adam. I assumed he worked for Code School, but I didn't know him. And he was like, "You broke my designs." And I was like, I don't follow. And he's like, "It is not supposed to look like that." I was like, "It's not?"
yeah.
He's like, "What did you" I was like, "Oh, I just zoomed in command plus like 5 times because 'cause I'm blind." And he was like he like scribbled something and walked
Oh,
away,
yeah,
right?
you
Like
absolutely taught me something, and I went out of that, 1, trying to solve the problem. 2, I went there was a conference, like, the next week, and I was, like, asking all the speakers there, I'm like, "Is there a way to detect browser zoom?" Like, I've
Mm,
got to, because like, the problem with that we were talking about then is, like, it's a controlled environment that we were trying to
yeah,
control how everything looked on the screen, and
yeah,
yeah, and and seriously, you could see exactly what happened as soon as I did, and like, I'm
yeah,
still so surprised that that there is not a solution for this, but there are
for the
ways to
browser zoom.
build that are so much better than the way we built that back then,
Mm,
using like mobile implementation first type of thing. So I know mobile first design got discussed in the last one, but I think also implementing mobile first really gives you that way of like when someone zooms 5 times,
what
what you end up with now is your mobile version of your page at scale, which is really nice.
Mm.
So as long as you're building that up in a way, but yeah, I do remember that.
Becca was saying there's nothing more fun than being in a test and the person next to you is hating on your design.
It's so humbling. It's so humbling.
Soul crushing, but hugely valuable is what she said. No, I love it. Do you still get to do user testing at all? I know Becca gets to do it a lot more than I do.
No.
But
One thing, so that we did, so we worked together at Code School, which eventually got bought by Pluralsight, and I did do a little time in Pluralsight, and I did love their discovery process.
Mm.
So we would design things, and then before any implementation happened, we did user tests through it. So it was clickable, like I think we were using Keynotes at the time, but it was like clickable, or what was that other tool? It doesn't matter. But there was a different tool. But like, so we would do all of that, and you would get all that information up front, and then you would go implement things beyond that. I don't get to do user conversations at all. I can watch some because we have people like talk with our business customers or various things. So you can watch like recorded versions, but I'm never like in one anymore.
Yeah. No, I love getting, it's like snooping, right? I'm like, how are you? Oh, you click on it that way. Oh, that's weird. Like
All the memes about it are so true, like
there's so
the one with the square hole, like, type of thing with the person putting every block, like, through the other spot. It's like, there's so many good ones.
oh hey. It's good to see you. Question in the chat, was balsamic the tool that you
No,
couldn't
it's the one
remember?
that just shut down. It was Envision.
Envision.
Envision was the tool.
Okay.
Oh,
So
that was a great tool.
is balsamic still kicking? I thought it was still a thing. Is it not kicking anymore?
I don't
Is
know.
it gone? Oh, okay. Well, you'll have to let us know, chat. Do you have any resources for developers that would like to up their front end or their design accessibility game, just
Yeah.
to like whether it is to take more part in the conversations or to be more confident in
I
having?
I think everything is a11yproject.com.
Oh,
So the one cool thing about that, on top of like that's a bunch of great resources, it has a resources page that has all the tooling and all this kind of things, a bunch of articles. It also shows you that an accessible site can be gorgeous. Like, so like
uh,
the whole thing of like it can't be goes out the window
oh,
'cause
spoilers! There is a panel question that Kathryn wrote, and I was like, "Oh, this is a good one." And it kind of goes back to that. Oh, but this page is so sexy. I guess we have to kill it. Like, can you have both?
yes,
Right? Like, and so you're saying there's an example. Like, we got to pull it up. I love it. Thank you, Kathryn, for getting that link in the chat. Oh, Dan, thank you so
of
much
course.
for coming on to do this segment with me. It means so much. And honestly, just getting to see your face again has been amazing. I didn't know, do you have time to be on our panel
Absolutely. Yep.
after this? Awesome. Well, I see behind the scenes our other guests are coming on to hop into the panel. So I'm going to start having them join us. Hello, Becca. Hello, Sarah. Hello, Diana. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Good to see you all. So everyone, meet everyone if you have not yet met everyone. And welcome. I am so thankful for each and every one of you coming on today to share your experiences and your expertise in the matter of accessibility in the design part of development. It has been a really, really cool show, and I'm so grateful. We've got some good questions to kick us through, but this is very chill. So, like, if at any point you're like, I want to answer a question you have not questioned, right? Like, that's totally an acceptable thing that you can interject. So, first question. In the design space, one of the most common complaints that Kathryn and I hear a lot is that all websites look the same. And I think Dan and I just kind of touched on this a little bit. But often they point to websites from the 90s, early 2000s, which, while visually interesting, are often inaccessible or wouldn't meet WCAG requirements today. Do you think there's space for creativity in accessible web design and development today? Or is it just a limitation and something that we need to accept as a worthy trade-off for greater access? Just kind of like a jump in there kind of situation. So like if you have thoughts, you just kind of like go for it.
I'll add a slight caveat to that. I feel like it's easy for us to forget that when the web like first came out, or we were first starting to build sites, they were actually hugely accessible, because we didn't have all this new stuff that we wanted to try out that made them inaccessible. um, but yeah, I think I've talked on this a little bit, but I think it's a slippery slope with creativity and innovation and usability and accessibility, like where you draw the line on, I want to innovate, I want to do something unique, but I also don't want to confuse people and build something that they're going to have to think about to understand how it works, because it's something they aren't used to seeing. But I definitely think, like, unless you're trying to hit like WCAG like triple A, I really don't think there are many limitations, from a design perspective. There's always creative solutions. If behind the scenes you have to do different things to make something accessible, I think it's easy to think that it's super limiting because it seems overwhelming. I mean, like, there are pages and pages of these guidelines. It's a lot. And I think we see it, if we can see it more as a design challenge, like a creative brief, like it has to be accessible. It actually is kind of exciting. I think it makes it more fun, at least for me. If you're designing kind of the same types of things, to have that extra level of complexity that you like have to build something that can meet that is cool.
I love that. I put up the question. I don't know if you all can see yourselves. I'll plop up the question that way as we're like going through each of these, if you want to chime in. But does anyone else have thoughts on space for creativity? Yes, Dan.
Sure. So I think there's lots of it, but I think that the not repeating some of the same things and the things being consistent allows for creativity in different ways. So if we were to do something like Brad Frost has been talking about, this like universal design system, right? If we had something along that where like forms, you've like there was a talk about the form being consistent, you've nailed that. If everyone was using a solution that their forms were all accessible and usable and that was consistent across a whole bunch of websites, that allows you to now be creative with micro interactions, add some delight, micro copy, find ways to like make your brand stand out a little different or your solution stand out a little different, but without breaking any of the things that just work for people.
I love that. So it's more of a standing on what exists to reach for further creativity. I like that. Very
And
cool.
also, I don't know about the others, but usually when I have some kind of limitations, that challenges me to be even more creative. So
Yeah, it seemed to be Becca's thought of like
Mhm.
one extra parameter to the formula to encourage you to use your creative thinking to solve this problem.
Yeah.
I love it though that none of you so far have thought it was insurmountable or something, just a trade-off.
And I'm going to agree with what everybody else said. I think there's always room for creativity in anything that we're doing, right? And I think we should always be pushing the envelope, and I think being able to come into a project with an accessibility first mindset, if you have that kind of baked into your DNA, then it's really not that difficult to find different ways to be creative.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Dan and Becca were saying that each touched on as far as like collaboration and the whole team effort of like if we're all thinking about it and bringing that to the table. So we like that. All right, our next one. And then Kathryn, you can interrupt me with chat questions as they come. I'm plopping this one on here. Okay. And putting it up live. So I know that some of the presentations touched on this, but what are some of the most common design implementation accessibility mistakes that people can avoid? Anything come to mind at all? Maybe it's not avoidable. Maybe it's a really hard mistake and you're like, I don't know how people can stop doing this.
Color contrast is number one
Absolutely,
for
yeah.
me. Like it honestly, like today before jumping on, I'm like, I'm gonna mention my company's name. I'm gonna hit my page real quick, get my couple of my things to make sure we're good. And like, still, the number one thing that we have to get to like AAA is just color contrast issues. Like so often, color contrast, and then not implementing touch points large enough. That one is another one that can be very common. I think it's unnatural for an engineer to add padding around a link, but to make it accessible, that's what you're going to have to do. So those are, I would say, like, are two of our most common.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd agree with the color contrast. Especially coming from a company that our branding was done years and years ago, and our main brand color isn't accessible. Like it is lime green, basically. And I think that happens a lot because it's like someone did branding, not thinking about the web, not thinking about accessibility at all, and then they hand you, they're like, "Here's the logo and our brand guidelines. Good luck." And like, so you have to come up with a whole different color system to use on the web that still feels right with the brand. And that can be rough. A big one I kind of touched on, like motion, like using motion in your design that you can't turn off. Like I apologize as a hot take if anybody's site does this currently because it's so popular right now. But the film background, or like the video background on home pages.
Oh yeah.
That
Yeah.
drives me crazy because if you put your main action item on top of that background, which I would expect you would because it's prime real estate on your homepage, I'm not going to see it. I'm just going to completely gloss over it because I'm just so distracted by probably really beautiful video, but it's not helping me get anything done. And so it's really hard because it's like that area, you want it to be beautiful when someone comes to your homepage and impactful, but at the same time, they're coming there to do something. And it's really, coming up with different ways to present that information and still make it feel beautiful and on brand. It's tricky.
Yeah, I really struggle with the video one because I feel like it hits a lot of different, like load time, for instance, right?
Oh,
You're on
yeah.
really bad
Oh, yeah.
Wi-Fi. So not only just like the attention disorders or motion disorders, but like just like Wi-Fi issues. I struggle to justify the big splash screen video type situations on web pages, but I know it does look good, I think, if it works, right? If it works for the human and for the Wi-Fi.
I would say also,
Yeah,
Alyssa,
B1 Mind was asking 45 pixels minimum touch size. I used to hear 44. Is there like do we have a tried and true? Do we have like a tap target type of situation?
I think it depends on what you're building. I mean, that's a good baseline. Certainly, I feel like Microsoft and Apple had two different numbers back in the day, and they were just off by a little bit, but they still published their own like guide with a number because got to be different. But I mean, I've built stuff for healthcare where we had like buttons that were like the whole screen because we knew they would be using a tablet to do like a survey, and we're like, these folks, we don't know what they're coming in with. So I mean, if it makes sense for what you're building, bigger is better. Just give people more space to do stuff.
And I know, did everyone get to say anything if they wanted to talk about our previous question, sorry, of what are some common design mistakes that could be avoided or accessibility mistakes?
I think, Alyssa, we talked about, and this is more on the implementation side, but getting alt text right and not just what you're saying, but not overusing it. All of those things are so, and again, it's maybe not necessarily design, but certainly implementation, and making sure that it's, I mean, we've had, you're not keyword stuffing. It's not about SEO at that point, right? It really is an accessibility feature and making sure that it's being used and utilized correctly.
All right, our next one is longer. So I am just putting in the short and sweet that I'm going to highlight, and then I'm going to read off the longer version. So a recurring challenge that we see in technology is the idea of a version 1 or MVP. It gets created without accessibility, which gets defended because they're trying something new, or they're trying to be quick and they might scrap it later. So they don't want to invest too much time right now. So they need to move fast and figure out if it's even viable for the market. Of course, if they do decide to move forward with the concept, it's then much harder to build an accessible product on an inaccessible foundation. Do you think there is ever space for pre-accessibility experimentation like this, or is accessibility always a requirement from the very beginning?
Well, this is something that, sorry, Sarah.
No, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to quickly jump in here because actually this was the beginning of my presentation. I believe that accessibility can be introduced at every point of the project, but it gets really hard when it's not from the very beginning with the design system. So as the others mentioned, you need to have accessible brand, you need to have accessible logo, colors, and everything. So better do it at the beginning. It's not that time consuming, it's not that hard to find colors that are that have good contrast. So
I think especially if you are talking about, because your segment was about design systems, if you're at that level and you've taken the time to invest and be like, this is our brand, and guess what? It's accessible, right? I feel like at that point, you're right. Like, let's go implement this form using the design system that we created, that we invested in. But I think on the fly can be tough sometimes. I've worked for clients where it was like, hey, we need this thing. And I'm like, cool. What are the guidelines? What are the specs? And they're like, yep, that's all we got for you. You just got to go build it. And so I feel like there are times when you're just like, but at least I've been like floundering of like, I will make this thing and it will be beautiful and accessible without any guidelines whatsoever. Right. So, but
We
no,
don't
I
need
think you're right.
rules.
As long as you, yeah.
but right, you won't put white call to action on a yellow button, for example. I mean, you try to at least have a sufficient contrast between colors. So
Yeah.
my point was that it's actually not that difficult to do it at the very beginning, and to always just have this in mind.
Well, I think it's also important to realize that if you're really trying to determine if this is this might be an MVP, but you still have users and user testing that you have to do. And if you're alienating a segment of your audience, your experiment could potentially fail because of that, not because the product isn't, or app isn't correct. So I think coming into any project with an accessibility first mindset is really going to help. It definitely is not going to hurt any of your process.
100%. It's also going to make you a better developer. Like in my mind, if you're not meeting WCAG at least single A, your product is already a failure. Because that's like, if you look at those guidelines, they're like the most basic things you could do. Like a link should go to a place. It should not be broken, like, so when there's basic things like that, I feel like it just should be a best practice that we factor into everything we do. Also, though, this is not a plug, but using tool sets that have that baked in, like Kindle UI, really does save you a lot of time, because you've already got this tool set that's accessible. And so, yeah, you might change things later, but having that right out the gate, you're not having to recreate the wheel for every type of control that you're putting in this thing.
Yeah, we have a question coming up, just so like you all can be braining it, about tools and tooling, and just like, I use this specific thing. I know I've already had some of you share yours, so we can reshare again, but absolutely, if you can, it's like, I think Dan said it earlier, it's one less thing to think about or rebuild so that you can reach further with other things. So.
One little thing on that is like, you're always going to pay this time in some way, shape, or form. So, and it's going to be cheaper to pay it up front than it is going to be to pay it as a debt item later on. So whenever you're trying to like push for this in like kind of way, it's just the way it always works.
I love it. That's a really good argument to look at someone like when they're like, no, this is V1. We just have to push it out, and be like, you're going to pay for this, whether it's now or in V2, right? Like V2.
Well, it's like that good, cheap, and fast. You can't have all three.
Oh yeah,
so you
that's a good
don't
saying.
do the accessibility side. You're just going to pay for it later, and usually always after the fact. It's more time, more money.
Actually, sometimes I even have had to explain the importance of even having a design system for a software product. So yeah, sometimes people don't even want to hire a designer for a startup, because we just want to implement something really fast and then see if our concept is working. But I agree with you that paying upfront is going to be a lot cheaper.
All right, we have another question coming up. Are there different design and accessibility needs that you consider for different mediums? So, for example, a website versus a web app versus a desktop app versus a mobile app.
Well, if we talk about navigation, of course, I always try to.
You put breadcrumbs on everything.
Sorry?
I said you put breadcrumbs on everything. Everything needs a breadcrumb. No, totally. I'm jazzing with you. You said navigation. I was like, she must love breadcrumbs. I see where this is going.
I like breadcrumbs, but not always, not everywhere. So yeah. And also, what I also mentioned earlier about the size of the components, if it's on a touch device, it's really logical to be larger because your thumb is bigger than the pointer. So yeah, stuff like that.
One nice thing is that like the assistive technology that's used for all devices is kind of similar. Like if you're using like a native app, it can be different depending on your device. But I think that's good. So you don't have to like if it's accessible on one device, it's typically going to be pretty accessible on others if you're really doing it well. But other than like size and navigation, I can't really think of anything else either. It's kind of
Mm.
mobile first, obviously, like is going to help you there a ton. Because I think it's a lot harder to think of the mobile design after the fact. Personally, like if I've designed this beautiful desktop site and then I'm like, okay, now make it small. Scrolling for years is typically the result of that, unfortunately.
I struggle though because I've seen people who are really intentional and they're like, this person is only going to use X, Y, and Z. So I'm just gonna hide everything else on mobile. And then I'm literally paralyzed because there's so many times where I'm catching a flight or I'm between, this errand and that errand. And I'm like, maybe if I rotate it, it'll give me the desktop app view, right? Like, no, like
That's so
so
true.
I don't think it's back to the implementation is not always enough. Like slapping
Well,
on
and don't
a face and
assume.
being like, hide half of it. It's too much, right? Like
Yeah.
it isn't always also the
Well, that's when we start assuming what our users want and what they're going to
Mm.
do. We can't do that. We're always going to be wrong. So,
One thing that's different, it's not necessarily needs, but testing is so different. So, for example, one thing that came up earlier was the touch point thing. So the Apple says 44 by 44. Axe, if you just do a desktop version, is like 24 by 24. So like little things like that need to be adjusted. Then one big one is like source order. So if you're on a mobile device, you're just going to be tapping things and touching, and you might see everything in a vertical way or maybe sliding. But then when you get to desktop, if you have altered that order to try and match a design that is different, you now have to tab through and make sure that it still makes sense
Oh,
in
yeah, the
going
flow.
from like the next input to the next readable area. Those types of things can change.
Dan, that was like exactly the next question. I love it. You segued us beautifully. Do you all have any recommendations around accessibility testing during the design phase? So I know you're saying Axe is good for this. So this could be around anything prototypes, wireframes, anything before the finished product. I know oftentimes similar to what Dan's talking about, where it's like I've prototyped it, but it's like in the browser, like not necessarily. I'm a very quick, like, yes, I scribbled out a wireframe. Now we must design with the CSS, right? And I know some people are like, that is horrible. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. It's my tool. So, but I love it. Axe is a good one. And I'm going to find that link real quick and highlight. But any others? Anything else you guys want to put up the question? Recommendations
Your
for
keyboard.
prototyping wireframe?
And I really
keyboard,
mean
yeah.
like just use your keyboard. Like try to
Like go hide your mouse in a shoebox
yeah,
and
go
like try to work.
pick somewhere on the page and try to get to it with your keyboard.
Mm.
And so like, and then of course, like there are screen readers and that kind of stuff. So like throwing up a tool and just navigating one of your pages, it'll open your eyes if you have never done it before.
Yeah, turn off your monitor too while you're at it and make it
Ooh,
real. Like that's
nice.
my favorite. I use NVDA because that's like the most, other than JAWS, that's the most popular screen reader. And there is a steep learning curve to using a screen reader in a real way, not just like I'm just going to let it read the whole page for me because we know that's not really what people do with them. But once you get it, it's fascinating. Like I can make a whole like mixtape of just horrible things that I've heard on pages where like things just get repeated. Like you don't hear a button and you're just like button, button, button. Like you can really get down with
Yeah.
some of these.
I definitely live and breathe screen reader because I'm I need the audio. And so there are oftentimes it's really sad actually when really high name products, I'm not gonna shout them out because I don't feel like this is a shaming sesh, but they just aren't compatible at all, like period. Like I have to export their HTML, turn it into some sort of readable format that my screen reader can then read because it's that bad. And so, but for me, I have found literally like I don't have to, but like it's worth it. Like for my brain, it is worth it to go through those steps. But I love what you said, Dan, about like try to navigate somewhere with a keyboard. And I like want to take it a step further of like, just like the same thing with the screen reader. Like Becca was saying, just like, just download one. I use natural screen reader. But I know you said you use what is it? And I don't know how to say it. It's like are we supposed to say Nvidia or no?
I never even touched trying to. Yeah, I'm just like, we'll say the letters. That seems right. That and
Like,
Jaws.
okay.
Yeah.
And then is that
It's
one
free,
paid
so that's
or
good.
it's free? Okay, because I know
Yeah,
Jaws is
it's
expensive,
free.
isn't it?
Yeah, it's
I
super
think so.
expensive. So that's
I've
why
heard.
I always use the other. But it
Okay.
also, so like I will say all of this, like I love the Axe tool too, by the way. All of those tools though, there's so much they can't detect. So using your keyboard and a screen reader is ultimately the best way to go for really like truly testing. But all that being said, the thing I hate testing the most is alt text, because if you have tons of images on your site, that's just a lot for me to look through. So I found it's actually an SEO tool called Screaming Frog, and it's just a crawler. And it'll crawl your site, and then it'll give me a nice Excel file of all
Did
the
you say
images, where they
screaming
are.
or screaming? What's the frog?
Screaming,
Screaming.
like,
Okay.
ah, yeah.
Okay.
It'll give me like an Excel file of all the images, where they are, and their alt text. So I can just scroll through and be like, oh, clearly that's bad, or this doesn't need to be here, and then go find it on the page. It saves you hours and hours of time.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. That really is, because there are often times where I'm trying, like there might be a double alt got generated or something got thrown in there and I'm like, where is that coming from? That's great. I love that. All right, before we move on, any last recommendations for the design phase? Anything else that pops into your brain as far as prototyping or wireframing or even the finished product, just testing your design for accessibility? Nothing else? You good? We Gucci? All right. This one's a long one, and I'm just gonna plop it in. I'm just doing it. We're just gonna put it in, and we will survive the length of the question. No, these questions are killer. Kathryn did a phenomenal job. Are there any good accessibility features, plugins, other resources for your favorite design software? And we might jump over this one if we've already talked about all of them. But speaking of like early testing, not everyone knows that Figma prototypes support screen reader access. There's also tons of great accessibility related add-ons in Storybook. So do any of you in your daily workflow or whenever you specifically sit down to do something for accessibility have something that we have not talked about yet that you just wanted to give a shout out to? And we can speed through this one if there aren't any, but anything come to mind?
I use it's on the Mac, an app called Contrast. It's like a little toolbar tool, and it lets you color pick anything. I actually honestly use it more just to get a color quickly without having to inspect something than I do for testing contrast, but
Well,
it's super handy.
Deanna was saying earlier that like she has one like that to
Yeah,
tell
I use
contrast.
it.
But do you have to select, like you color pick two colors and then it will give you the ratio of that contrast, or do you
Yeah.
screenshot something and it
just gives you a little color picker. You go to the screen and grab whatever you want, and then it'll let you use the keyboard to go up and down to adjust the tint and the shade. So if you want to see, oh, if I just darken this a tiny bit, will it pass? You can. That's super handy.
Cool. What was that one called again? Sorry.
Contrast. And I think it's only
Awesome.
available for the Mac, unfortunately, but for designers.
Perfect.
They state they have Figma plugin. I still haven't discovered it.
Like it is stated though. So if we just try hard enough. It's like my husband says, I'll be working on something and he'll look over and go, "But did you want it? Did you want it bad enough?" And I'm like, I did not. I did not hunt for that. Okay. So it says there is a Figma plugin though. I need to look.
I've never gotten to use it, but I've seen tons of good feedback around Stark. So like getstark.co, which has a series of add-ons for like various tools.
Nice. Very cool. All right. We are coming up on our last question, and then I will double check and make sure that chat doesn't have anything as well before we wrap. But be thinking if you have any shout outs, because I will have each one of you go through and do a shout out. Thank you, Kathryn. She found it. Getstark.co and put it in the chat. This is a long list of amazing resources. I need to compile them and put them like in the description for the recording. Okay. Last question. As developers, we're often focused exclusively on the code aspects of accessibility, ARIA and alt text, semantic HTML, etc. However, as we've discussed today, there are a lot that has to happen in the ideation and design phase to ensure that a project is actually accessible. do you have any further resources for our listeners who might be interested in learning more about that part of the process?
I would share, this is a shameless plug for us, but telework.com blogs actually we have over 200 articles about accessibility, and from anything from just the basics on up to more kind of random scenarios. So again, we've said this isn't just lip service; it really is something that we believe in. So please, if you're looking for something, it's a great resource that we're really proud to share with everybody.
We also have some content on our website that is related to this topic. We are not this far as Sarah mentioned, but yeah, we're starting to build more awareness, because where I'm located, it's not a big thing yet. So I'm in Eastern Europe, so here people don't really care about everyday accessibility and not to mention web accessibility. So
if you all, we have a private chat window, have any like personal blogs or company things that you want to share, you can drop me the exact link and I will put it up on screen when we talk about it. But perfect. Thank you, Kathryn. She put up the Resolute one as well as the Telework one. Dan or Bekah, anything you want to highlight in this? I think you said there was a True Matter list, Bekah, that we shared earlier, and I can go find
Yeah,
that.
we have a blog, which is, we have lots about accessibility, but a lot about usability, which again, those go hand in hand. So it's a good resource for that. We also have a series of posts about accessibility that were part of a Telework white paper forever ago. So the content's good.
I was like, wait a minute. I was like, you were on the most recent white paper? Okay, so there are
no, not that one. It was very old.
I was going to say, there are a number of our articles of the ones on telework.com are written by True Matter. So,
Dan, anything you want to highlight? Any resources?
No, not for that. I stay mostly on the first part of the question.
Sounds good. All right. Well, I think that is a wrap. Last call on chat questions. But I again cannot tell you how thankful I am for you all taking your time today to talk about this. I think the more we talk about it and bring up even just those little wins for developers and designers really, really helps. Yeah, there's the True Matter link. Perfect. Thank you so much. And I will gather a list of all the links and put them in the description of the recording. So if you're watching this recorded instead of live, check the description for the links to all the resources and other things mentioned in today's show. But yeah, any other thoughts? Anything else from our beautiful panel of guests?
Well, just thank you guys for putting this together. It's awesome.
Oh, excellent. All right. Well, that is a wrap. We will see you on the next Code It Live session. But thank you all. Have a good one.
Bye.